Alright, and we're back. This time we're going to be doing another quirk review for the Darkest Dungeon. This time specifically, we're going to be doing the D, E, and F tier quirks, so that would be these 3 tiers worth of quirks. And this time, since we are reviewing the worst quirks in the game, we're going to hear a lot of pessimism come out of me. These are some of the worst quirks in the game by a long shot, by a fair margin. Um, so yeah, we're gonna have some fun today for dissing quirks. Oh yeah, that's right. Before I start the video, I need to go through the disclaimer and also mention there's a link in the description right now of this YouTube video, where it just takes you straight to the spreadsheet if you don't want to listen to me yammering on for about like for another 40-ish minutes. You can just get this tier list and just look at it on your own. I have notes for you if you want to read it, but I'm going to be explaining these notes in further detail in this video. And the next thing is the disclaimer. When I am evaluating quirks, this list specifically is made with the assumption that quirks are more flexible, even though they are generally weaker than most trinkets. There are 5 quirk slots for that. They're more flexible because there are 5 quirk slots, and each quirk has very few lines of text. So you can like micromanage and like kind of customize as you see fit. While there are only 2 trinket slots, and each trinket has 3 or 4 lines of text, maybe with certain upsides and sometimes downsides that you can't circumvent because the trinket slots are so restricted. Therefore, to me, if a quirk is allowing me to run is giving me buffs that I value very highly on a trinket, that quirk will be very rated very highly. And so, because that quirk can allow me to maybe circumvent some downsides that those trinkets might be giving me. But since we are going over some of the worst quirks in the game, you're not going to see that occurring too much today. Just need to go through the disclaimer just in case, though. But we're going to start with the D tier right now. The D tier is for specific quirks that I believe are only amazing in the early or mid game, and otherwise are really bad in the late game. They fall off really hard, and so I don't really think these quirks are good at all, and I'm really annoyed when I get them. But some of them, like these upper ones, are okay to me. But in the early game, I'm very happy to see them. I'm very happy to be able to generate some value off of them before I have to pray that they get removed through the natural cycle of things, or I have to lock other quirks. Uh, right. So let's start with the first section, which is a bunch of these scouting quirks. We've got Warrens, Explorer, Cove Explorer, like Scroungers and everything. Basically, what you need to know from this is if it's Warren, if it's an Explorer quirk, that means in the area that it specifies, you get plus 10% scouting chance, and if it's a Scrounger quirk, in that area you get 5% scouting chance. So, scouting chance is actually one of the strongest stats to have in the game. Very. There's a lot of things that is very good with scouting. You first of all, you get to see what the map layout is if scouting procs. You get to see which direction you can walk to engage in the least amount of fights. You get to see where the curios are for certain quests. You get to see where the quest objectives are for certain and the an extra added benefit of having scouted out a fight is that there is no chance for you to be surprised in that fight at all, so your team won't be shuffled and you won't have to deal with this really annoying scenario where you have to reposition them before you can actually do combat with them. So scouting chance again, very powerful. But the fact that these scouting quirks are restricted to an area, so restricted to only the Warrens or only the Cove or only the Runes or only the Weald, is very limiting for them. Very often in the early game, you're looking to pick up something called the Survival Guide. I'm gonna look that up right here for you guys. Trinkets. Oops. Well, you get to see my desktop for a bit, but Survival Guide. Survival Guide is a very strong common that gives you plus 10% scouting chance just everywhere. So this is an omni scouting trinket, and that's a lot better than these very specific scouting area trinkets, quirks. And so even though these give me an excuse to not have to run the the Survival Guide, which gives me -1 speed, they're not strong enough. They're just not as applicable. And so they're down here for that reason. So the first two are going to be the Warrens scouting quirks. The Warrens itself is very boxy and has a lot of interconnecting and interlocked hallways. That is the best for having good scouting chance because you will have when you do successfully proc the scout, you will have a large amount of information to work off of, as well as when you proc a crit scout. You will see a lot more stuff and have a lot more chance to reveal a secret room, and secret rooms in the early game are very, very, very powerful. They give you trapezohedrons, which sell for a huge chunk of gold, and it gives you a chance to roll for one of the three heads. And that the three heads would be Dismas's head, Junia's head, and Barristan's head. And Junia's head and Dismas's head specifically are super strong trinkets that can really propel you into the mid game, and even and sometimes even the late game. They're still run on certain characters, and they're very, very suitable substitutes for trinkets in the late game when you're missing some of the better trinkets. Barristan's head is a little more niche, but it also has very good, strong applications in certain fights like Wolf or what are other fights I need protection? Really just Volf, to be honest, off the top of my head. Or maybe you could take it to the Prophet or something like that. But it's nice to have. It's nice even if you get Barristan's head, which is in my opinion the worst of the three. It means that the next time you go to a secret room, you will not see Barristan's head, and maybe you'll roll Dismas or Junia's head, and that's really nice. Secret rooms are very powerful, and Warrens is a very good place to farm for them, especially with these Warrens quirks. And for that reason, that's why I believe 5% scouting in Warrens is actually better than 10% in Cove and Runes, which I rank next. The 10% in Cove and Runes, these are just bigger numbers than the 5% versions of them. The Cove and Runes, they are a lot less boxy than the Warrens, and they have less interconnected hallways, but they still do have some kind of network that is looking slightly interconnected. So you will generate a decent amount of value off of the 10% scouting in Cove and Runes, but you will generate less off of the 5%, but of course, scouting chance is still good. I've rated the 5% quirks for the Cove and Runes actually above the 10% quirk for Wield. So I think Wheeled Explorer is actually worse than than the Scrounger versions of Coven Runes, specifically because the Wheeled is just a long hallway most of the time, and there's not a lot of interconnecting hallways in the Wheeled. So really often when you're procking scouting in the Wheeled, you're only going to get to see one or two rooms ahead of you or around you, and it's not really that exciting to have scouting in the Wheeled specifically. But scouting chance is still good in the Wheel. It is still another thing that gives you the opportunity to find secret rooms, and so that's still very, very powerful. Uh, at least in the early game, of course. This is all quirks are only good in the early game, is what I'm saying, or mid game. They transition slightly into the mid game, but as soon as you find your first scouting trinket, are these quirks do not do enough, in my opinion. So I'm hoping in the mid game, as I fill out the quirks on my characters, that these quirks are the ones that get replaced first. These scouting quirks, but also these quirks as well, which are the tacticians of each area. I hope these get replaced as well. They generate a great amount of value in the early game, though. But Warren's tactician, Moose tactician, Wheel tactician, Cove tactician, these are these give you plus 15% damage in each of those areas respectively, and damage in the early game is very, very powerful. Very often in the early game when you have no trinkets and no quirks, and not even the skills on some characters that you want because you haven't unlocked the guild yet, and of course not upgraded equipment because you haven't unlocked the blacksmith yet. Very often in the early game, you are looking for as many buffs, as many impactful buffs as possible, and plus 15% damage is very, very large of a buff to be giving to your characters in the early game. Even though it is in these areas specifically, you can take early game characters into these areas specifically just because you have a tactician quirk on them for that area. I do that actually very often. Um, but yeah, real quick, I have them in this order specifically because they transition slightly okay into the end game, where you might be taking, where like you might be facing the mini bosses of the area. So the Swine Skiver and the Warrens, the Bone Bear and the Runes, the Virago and the Wield, and Squiffy, not Squift, Squiffy Gast in the Cove. And this is the order of how um likely you are to want to burst these guys down when you see them. The Swine Skiver is very dangerous. You're going to want to burst him down right away. The Bone Bear is very dangerous. If you can't clear corpses, you're going to want to get him in front and burst him down right away. Virago's not as priority targety. She's very dodgy, and so it's kind of hard to hit the Virago specifically. So you might not be focusing her down necessarily all the time, but she is something you're looking to hit pretty often. Squiffy Gas is a joke. He has like such low HP, it doesn't really matter. You're probably gonna hit him and he's gonna die. Um, but yeah, best. My bad. I've completely skipped this section. The best people for these quirks are just people who work better in the areas. You're gonna just you can read them on your own. It's pretty self-explanatory. Take the runes quirks and just exclude all of the bleed people. Take the like stuff like that. It's pretty obvious. Just read that on your own. Natural. Natural is a quirk that activates only when you have no trinkets. It gives you plus 20% HP, plus 20% healing received, and plus 3 speed. These are all very, very. Well, the first two stats are not as relevant, although in the early game I am okay with having just more HP. That's really neat to have. But plus 3 speed is what I'm really looking at. Plus 3 speed in the early game is very, very powerful. It allows you to do a lot of neat things that speed just allows you to do just in general. You're going to have the ability to stun people before they move, to kill people before they move. That's really, really powerful. Plus 20% HP is actually, I actually glossed over it by accident a few seconds ago, but it's really, really powerful in the early game as well, just because you're not going to be healing that efficiently, because your healing skills aren't upgraded, or you're not going to have them unlocked most of the time. So having a higher HP pool is very, very powerful. On top of what I just said about healing not being very effective, you actually get more effective healing, which is another thing that natural does for you in the early game, um, which is amazing. These are all in my opinion, all three of these stats are something pretty valuable in the early game, and natural gives all three of them to me for the price of no trinkets. And in the early game, when I have no trinkets or no good trinkets anyway, I'm pretty happy to trade off my trinket slots for these bonuses on natural. But as soon as I enter the mid game, when I've secured some very rare trinkets that are very, very powerful, natural starts to look really, really disgusting, because all it really does for me is give me 3 speed, which is nice. 3 speed is very strong, but not at the cost of both of my trinket slots. I can definitely find a better combination of trinkets than just plus 3 speed. These, oh yeah, and of course these stats mean nothing to me. In the mid stage of the game. But yeah, of course, everyone's gonna enjoy this in the early game just because you have no trinkets and no one really cares. No one really hates it specifically. We've got Weapon Tinker and Armor Tinker next. These are some gold. These are some reductions to upgrading your weapons or armor. So this is just blacksmith specifically, and it's just really a way to save money. I think the more important one is Weapon Tinkerer, because you're generally going to be upgrading weapons first, just because it improves more important stats such as crit damage and speed. These are all very, very important stats for you to have transitioning into mid game. You want to start to be aggressive and proactive in the mid game, uh, and you want to start to be more proactive and aggressive in the mid game and kill your enemies before they can do anything to you. So these are very strong stats to have. On the other hand, Armor Tinkerer is HP and dodge. These are very reactive stats, not as important. Nice to have, of course, and you should definitely be upgrading armor along with weapons at when you can. But if I had to choose one first, I would definitely pick weapons over armor. And of course, everyone would like to have it. Everyone, you would like to save money on everybody's armor and weapons, and no one really hates it. But again, all these quirks not very exciting in the mid game or late game. So definitely be looking to replace these quirks. So now we move on to the E tier. These are quirks that I think are actually useless. They say they do something, but I don't think they do enough for me to care. And you can see that I really don't care about these quirks at all, because I don't even want to think about who's better or worse with these quirks. I just think this entire tier is just so irrelevant that I don't have the, I'm not bothered enough to even try to think about who's better or worse with them. I'm gonna try and rattle off the top of my head as we go through these quirks, but eh, there's not really that much of a difference. Um, and of course, these are definitely the ones you want to want to be praying to be replaced when you develop a new quirk. These are just absolute garbage. Yeah. But anyway, let's start on them so I don't keep talking in a circle. We've got the adventurer versions of the area quirks. Each of the adventurer quirks will give you minus 20% stress in the warrens, weald, runes, or cove, respectively, for the area that they are specifying. And minus 20% stress is very, very powerful. It's actually a very large number, but being limited to an area and not actually having applications in the darkest dungeons at all is very, very sad. Um, it's just not doing enough. And in the late game, you should be efficient at killing enough and have enough good stress healing capabilities between campfires and characters that you don't need this minus 20% stress in the late game at least. You don't need this you don't need the minus 20% stress in a specific area. Of course, you could see I have Photomania over here in the S tier. It's just a generic minus 20% stress everywhere. This is a very powerful quirk just because it applies everywhere. But these quirks are not because they only apply in one area, and you're not always going to that one area specifically. So in the late game, these don't matter because you are efficient enough at killing and stuff to not be taking a lot of stress hits. But in the early game specifically, they are also not really relevant because early game is just a full-on race phase. You do not have the recovering capabilities to recover through the stress damage or the actual damage of most of the enemies. So you kill what you can and take. And if you get afflicted, that's fine. You just have to take the affliction to the face. Um, and generally in the early game, if you have a character who's stressed or who's very high stress and not yet afflicted, or if you have a character who is afflicted and they didn't develop any good quirks at all, you should just dismiss them, in my opinion. Just because you haven't played enough, like they haven't gained enough experience and you haven't invested enough gold in them for them to be really valuable to your team. You can just dismiss them and hire someone straight off of the stagecoach, which is roughly the same power level as the person you just dismissed. So really, early game, I just think you should be farming gold a little bit and dismissing and like cycling people out who don't have any good quirks at all to hire people with good quirks. Yeah. Yep. But yeah, order's kind of trivial here. It doesn't really matter which one's better. I just kind of put them in this order because there's more stress casters in the Warrens. There's two of them, so you got the drummer and the wretch. The wield. Yeah, honestly, I'm not even gonna go through it. Just know that they're not. They're all roughly the same, and they're all roughly bad. Healer's gift, stout, and fast healer. These are all three quirks that affect camp skill healing from camp skills, like healing HP from camp skills, and these are all really really bad for the reason that you should not be healing at a campfire. If you're using campfires to heal, that means you're not using campfires to buff or heal stress. Healing stress is a lot harder to do than healing HP. You should almost always be taking at least an off healer or a healer in a comp. So you should be managing a stress phase a recovery phase well enough that you shouldn't need to heal with camp skills. Every single character does benefit from this because every single character has wound care except for the flagellant, um, and so every single character can make use of these skills if you don't have enough if you don't have enough camp skills that you care about to use points on. But you should be having some of the best. You should be buying camp skills that can help you fill out your camp points as efficiently as possible. And almost all characters have some really good camp skills you should be looking to. But of course, healer's gift is better than stout, is better than fast healer, just because sheer numbers. I don't know why they have three versions of this in the game, and I'm really angry about it. Sometimes when I see fast healer, I'm like, why is this in the game when healer gifts in the game? Yeah. Prismatic stability and balance. These are both really, really weak quirks. Move resist is not a very good stat to be having a lot of because I think move resist is actually a fake stat. Move resist is useless because if you stack a lot of move resist on one character, whenever they get hit with a move that tries to like shift their position around, they will resist it, sure, and that's probably like that's cool and all, but that high move resist character still moves if your lower move resist characters get moved. So if your lower resist characters get moved, like pulled in the front, then your huge move resist character that's standing in the front is gonna move back as well. So what I'm really trying to say is move resist is really useless unless all four of your characters have a lot of move resist because your characters get moved around if any of your characters get moved around, right? Because it's about the ordering in the team comp, and so I really don't see any benefit in these two quirks at all. They actually do almost nothing to me. So yeah, moving along. Irrepressible is plus 5% virtue chance. This is a terrible quirk. It is strict. Oh, actually, I completely forgot this. This is 30%. But yeah, it is strictly anti-synergistic with your main game plan. Your main game plan is to stay as far away from 100% stress as possible. You do not want to be doing affliction rolls because if you get afflicted, it's really really bad. Um, And so a quirk that is blank until you are attempting an affliction roll is really bad. And a quirk that is only give you 5%, 5% is so little. 5% virtue chance when you do an affliction roll takes the base virtue chance of 25. Your base virtue chance is 25%, and it boosts it to 30%. 30% is so inconsistent. It's super unreliable, and you still have to pray every time you do that affliction roll, even with irrepressible. So this guarantees nothing. This is a blank quirk, and even when it's not a blank quirk, it might still be a blank quirk, is what it is. One of the worst quirks in the game, in my opinion. Stress faster, equally as useless. This is still anti-synergistic with your game plan, which is you. Okay, so what stress faster does is when your characters are above 50 stress, they do not they consume 100% less food, which means they don't consume food. So what happens? What is our main game plan? Our main game plan is to keep characters as low stress as possible because there's a lot of good things that come with low stress. Low stress means you are further away from affliction rolls. Low stress at the end of a dungeon means you're more likely to develop positive quirks and less likely to develop negative quirks. Actually, my bad, my bad. Low stress doesn't actually affect your positive quirk development rate. But it does affect your negative quirk development rate, which and what I mean by that is the lower stress you have, the less likely you are to develop negative quirks at the end of a dungeon. So yeah, our main game plan is to keep characters below this 50, and so our main game plan makes stress faster a blank quirk. But let's just say we let's just say for some reason our main game plan is not to keep characters at 50 stress and below. Maybe it's to keep them at 50-ish stress so that we can proc stress faster. Um, what what if they never get above 50 stress? Okay, look, like for example, let's take them in at 0 stress, right? But we want to get them up to 50 stress. What if they never get up to 50 stress? Then they're still eating full food the entire time. And you as a player should plan for them eating full food at all times because you're not sure when they're going to be above 50 stress. So you always take full food anyway, right? So you always take full food, accounting for them for this stress faster anyway. And when you proc it, sure, they're not gonna eat food once in a while, and that's cool. But what that does is it really only saves you one or two food, and you can use that food. And it's not even saving you food in terms of gold. You're still gonna be buying that food. You're just gonna have food left over that you can use for HP healing, which is gonna heal them blood for like a few HP. Not really relevant. This quirk just doesn't do anything. As a player, you shouldn't be playing to this quirk. We're talking. Let's talk about Meditator and Nymphomania. These are quirks that increase the stress healing that you receive from stress buildings, and specifically, Meditator gives you more stress healing from meditation, and Nymphomania more stress healing from the brothel. Meditator is pretty sweet, I think. Definitely better than brothel. I really don't like using stress buildings because let's actually just take a look real quick. I'm going to show you something. Let's see, Abby. Abby is what we're looking for. So with every stress healing building, there comes a bunch of secondary effects. So there's effects that are positive in the meditation hall, which is the cloister, and there are which one's praying and which one's this is meditating, right? So and then there are negative effects that come with using the meditation hall as well. So I believe the meditation is one of the better. It has the least amount of negatives, my bad. Meditation has the least amount of impactful negative things relative to their positive things, in my opinion. So I like to use meditation a lot, but I still stay away from using it because there are negative things that happen when you use meditation. For example, calm. Calm is a very bad quirk to have, and you risk getting calm. It's a very low percentage, but you risk getting calm when you meditate. You also risk losing your character for 1 or 2 weeks when you meditate. You also risk um yeah, you also just risk losing them for forever because you keep rolling this 4%. It's just a lot of bad things I don't like to deal with when I'm using stress healing buildings. But definitely the meditation is one of the better ones, and so I'm okay with this one at least. It still does nothing because I'm trying not to use the stress buildings, but something. Oh, but for the brothel, let's go to the brothel. The brothel is a lot worse. The brothel is all the way down here. You can develop diseases. You could develop -5 speed is a horrible debuff to be developing. Distracted and misplace a trinket. You can lose trinkets from your inventory. Yeah, you can lose your character for a week, for 2 weeks, maybe for forever. Actually, if you keep rolling this is actually a 16. This is actually a 1 in 6 chance every time. Every week, there's a 1 in 6 chance your character just keeps staying in the brothel, which is horrible. And of course, you get these like sweet positive quirks, like positive buffs, like +6 speed for the next quest, -25 stress percent for the next quest. But these are not worth the random development of syphilis or the random development of -5 speed instead. Just not very exciting to me. And so the brothel is lower to me than the meditator. Yeah. The brothel is lower for me than meditation. We got night owl and lurker. These are low torch quirks. So at 25 or below torchlight, you get +2 speed for night owl and +10 speed for lurker. These are very very weak. The What low light does is it gives you extra loot, but it punishes you heavily. Like enemies will have higher damage, higher accuracy, I like to say, and just like the higher. Oh, no, let me just take a look at it. I'm not gonna. Let me not freestyle that light meter. So when it's black as pitch, or when it's, I guess we'll say when it's dark, when these quirks are active, you give monsters more accuracy and more damage by this much. That's significant. That's a very large amount. You give them +10 accuracy and plus roughly what 17.5% is like about a 6 extra damage. You give them, yeah, you get surprised more often, and sure, you get crits more often, but also it's not shown on the UI apparently, but apparently monsters get extra crit on uh, like super dark light as well. So you're really getting punished a lot, and what you're really getting is just some more loot. And oh, you also take more stress, by the way. So just a lot of very very bad things that I just don't think are worth the extra loot. Also, on top of that, I don't think the extra loot's that important because when you're doing a medium and long dungeon, which are the dungeons you should be doing, you should stop doing short dungeons almost right away, almost as soon as you can, to be honest. And when you're doing a medium or a long dungeon, you will be getting enough loot to be filling out your inventory a lot of the time. And so more loot is just is it's nice to have more loot, but what's going to happen is you're going to have to throw out loot and then to pick up more loot, or you're going to have to pray that you're going to have to do some more riskier things with the gems instead. And I just don't think that's ever needed. And these, I mean, at the end of the day, these are just not impactful enough buffs to offset all of the darkness things. So these quirks are pretty bad. Backtracker, though, is the next one. No stress taken when backtracking. So I actually don't know what backtracking means in this in this case, in the text of this quirk, but I only think there are two scenarios which which I personally would call backtracking. And that would be when you as a player are moving your characters backwards, like when they're kind of like tiptoeing backwards in a hallway, so they're moving backwards in a hallway, so not in the frontal direction. That is one thing that could be classified as backtracking, and the other thing that I would say is backtracking, which could be backtracking, is when they are going through a hallway that they've already been through. So in both of those scenarios, backtracking is saving you some stress. But how much stress is it saving me? How often am I backtracking in a hallway? I'm basically never backtracking. I'm never walking backwards in a hallway. So that part saves me no stress. How often am I walking through a hallway that I've already walked through? Not very often. There's almost no benefit to doing that. There's going to be a lot, like when you walk through hallways you've already been through, there's chances for you to have more fights. Like random fights will spawn in those hallways again. And the stress you'll be taking in those hallways is going to be like very very minor. I just don't think backtracker is strong enough to even ever be considered anything above this tier. Just useless. Gambling skill gambler, of course, same thing. Let's go over here. This is you have to put your people in the gambling hall to get any benefit out of skill gambler. And what skill gambler does is it gives you plus about 13% chance to earn money and plus about 13% chance to earn trinkets. But you also still have the chance to lose money and the chance to lose trinkets. So I don't want to ever be risking a chance to lose money or trinkets just to get more money or trinkets. See, this is the gambling. This skill just tells you to gamble. Gambling is bad. There's no reason to gamble. Like you're not gonna be making that much extra money. You're not gonna. There's a chance you get a trinket, but it's not gonna be a very good one most of the time. I believe they have a weight towards the lower trinkets. Yeah, so there's a rarity. There's a rarity modifier. It's like you're more likely to lose trinkets of lower rarity or stuff like that, something like that. I don't really care enough to read. This is just a backwork. Don't worry about it. Husk Slayer, Scythe Master. Oh, you can go back and pause it if you want to read it, if you really care that much. Tell me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong. But Husk Slayer, Scythe Master, these are only applicable in the farmstead because they are the Slayer, and this is actually like a half hater quirk for the Husk enemies only. I don't know why this is doesn't have -15 stress, but whatever. I don't play enough farmstead to really know too much about farmstead, so I'm not going to pretend. I did, however, ask experts from the Darkest Dungeon Discord, who at least people who I believe are experts, people whose opinions I respect a lot, and who have logged about 2,000 to 2,500 kills in endless mode, and one of them is still going very strong at 2,020 kills. Shout out to the year 2020. Neither of these quirks are good is what they say to me. Mainly because the easier parts of the dungeon of the endless mode is actually the part with husks. You're not going to be generating a lot of value of the easiest parts if these quirks don't generate a lot of value if they only work against the easiest parts of the dungeon. I'm not excited about these quirks at all for that reason. And they told me to never have these quirks ever. So I believe in them. I'm going to say they're useless. And now we get to the F tier. The F tier is for quirks, for positive quirks, quirks that the developers believed were good quirks. The F tier is for quirks like that, which I believe actually make your characters worse. So I believe these quirks here, these three I listed, are actually negative quirks in disguise as good quirks. And I'm going to describe to you why they are bad for your characters. And the first one is Second Win. Second Win, when you are below 50% HP, plus 10% damage. How good is that? It's horrible. And why is it horrible? Because there are so many quirks that give you more than 10% damage or 10% damage without you having to be below 50% HP, right? So, like really quick, I could just scroll up here. Bam, Slugger, 10% melee damage. Bam, Warrior of Light, 10% damage. Bam, Prismatic Force, 15% damage. Literally all the hater quirks, bam, 15. Wait, bam, 15, bam, 15. Bam, another 15, my bad. Clicked the wrong thing. Bam, 15. Unearing, 10% range damage. 20% damage for Fairweather Fighter. Unholy Hater, 15% damage again. So many quirks do so much more than 10% damage. So what's so special about this quirk compared to all of those, despite it, just being strictly inferior? It's only when you are below 50% HP are you getting this bonus. And what is a scenario where you're below 50% HP? A scenario where you're below 50% HP is a scenario where you want to be healing yourself. You do not want to enter the next fight at below 50% HP. And what do you want to do when you're healing yourself? You want to stall. You want to stall so that you don't end the fight before you can heal off the fact that you took a bunch of damage. And what does Second Wind not do? It doesn't stall. It literally just speeds up the fight. So in a scenario where you want to be slowing down the fight as much as possible, abusing the reinforcement timer maybe, you are Second Wind is literally not letting you do that. So you are actually shooting yourself in the foot for your reinforcement phase if you're using Second Wind. If you have Second Wind on your character. I don't think this is as offensive enough and as bad enough to warrant me saying remove this quirk, remove this positive quirk, but it's one of the things that you should be looking at and really praying to just be replaced or manually remove it at some point. Clutch hitter is the exact same reasoning. It's a lot. It's I think a lot worse than Second Win, because crit is a lot harder for you to predict. Sometimes you might just crit by accident, and it's nice. The crit gives you like a little bit of stress heal, but it's 50. It's HP that you're missing here. It's not stress. It's HP you're missing, and crit is going to deal so much damage and end the fight a lot faster than you're comfortable with. Same reason as Second Win. Clutch hitter is just bad. There's so many crit quirks up here. Bam, 5 crit on ranged, like bam, 5 crit. All the Slayers just give you crit, and all the Slayers are such good quirks, and you just don't need that pinch crit. Precise Striker, 5 crit. Prismatic Precision, 5 crit. 4 crit, my bad. Just so many other ways to get crit. Deadly, even, I would say, is so much better. 2 crit. 2 crit all at all times is much better than 5 crit only when you're at 50% HP and below. Um, yeah, but anyway, let's get through that. Last gas, the actual worst quirk in the entire game. Well, positive quirk in the entire game. This quirk is so bad. This is a instant remove to me at almost all times that I develop it. And why is that? Because again, this pinch 50 tag is just so painful for last gas. Not to mention, like, so many quirks just give you 2 speed just in general. Why do I want more speed specifically when I'm on like low HP? There's quick reflex. Look at all of these speed quirks to give +2. Pick any of these. Look at these, like, first turn speed quirks, +4. Just so much more powerful than only when I'm below 50. And when I'm below 50% HP, one of the things, obviously, when you're below 50, like when you're on Death's Door, you are below 50% HP. And when you're on Death's Door with a dot, you do not want to be going faster than your healer. You do not want to have more speed specifically for that scenario. When you have more speed for that scenario, you are just putting yourself at a lower chance to heal that character off of Death's Door. So they will be taking that dot death blow roll. This quirk literally kills some characters, by the way, is what I'm trying to tell you right now. And so a quirk that literally kills some of your characters is a quirk that is really bad. Last gas, worst quirk in the game. And just like that, we've wrapped up the DE and F tier quirks. These are all the quirks in the game. I've covered them all across these 3 videos. Um, Pretty happy with that. But if you have any disagreements, if you want to talk about it, things in the comments, feel free to do so. But other than that, thank you for watching.